You don't know the power of the dark side.
What's going on, guys? Back in another video, another episode of Read It or Skip It. Today's book, or should I say books, that we're going to talk about are the Jedi Academy Trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson. So we have Jedi Search, Dark Apprentice, Champions of the Force. Now, mind you, this is one book, but it is the trilogy. This is an actual print from 1994 when the book was published, so it's nice to have that. It's in really good condition for being older than me, so I'm quite proud of that. So to give you an overview without giving too many spoilers, because I'm not here to spoil books. I really don't want to, because if you watch the video and you're spoiled, you may not read it. So pretty much this is a stable point for the EU, as is the Thrawn trilogy. I would say that's like cream of the crop. If you only plan on reading any Star Wars books, read those three. And if you like them, if you want to read more, by all means, branch off from there. But this is kind of a very renowned book too, at least so I've heard. So it takes place like 2 or 3 years after the Thrawn campaign, so roughly 8 to 10-ish years after Return of the Jedi. I'll post a picture of the Legends timeline here so you can see where it's at. Pretty much, to not go into any spoilers, Luke Skywalker is wanting to start his new Jedi Academy. So that's pretty much what he's doing in the initial part of the book. It all goes fine until it doesn't. There are some darker elements of this book, sort of implied by the title of the second book. And for the most part, even though this book feels dated, because it's older than I am, closing in on 30 years old now, it tries its best to be consistent with everything established before. Now, mind you, it's kind of hit and miss with books that were written before the prequels, because they don't talk about midichlorians. It's a little bit more wishy-washy on how the Force works. It wasn't as fleshed out. So you kind of got to just be okay with it. I know it could kind of turn you off, but overall, I enjoyed this book. As I said, Luke Skywalker is searching for potential Jedi candidates, runs into some trouble, some really big trouble that drags in everybody. There are some outside threats, or some Imperial remnant threats pretty much, that stir up a whole lot of stuff. And by the end of the book, you're left with a very satisfying conclusion and a cliffhanger. This is the only 3 books I read by Kevin J. Anderson. I know he's got others, but his writing style is different than what I'm used to. This book felt very, I don't want to say simplistic, because it wasn't, but it wasn't as complex as some other books that I've read. This book to me felt as though its target audience was a little bit younger, and maybe it was. It's not like a young reader book, but it just felt very easy to read, very consistent, followed a very linear story path. There wasn't a whole lot of things where they would leave an Easter egg here and you'd have to try to remember what the hell that meant, because that's something I'm guilty of. Is I'll read books and I'll have to take notes on everything, because it may be a couple days before I get back to it, and I'll forget everything that's going on. So in terms of it being easy to read, it very much so is. Now, that can also be a bad thing, because I don't want to say it was boring, because it wasn't. It just wasn't as compelling as other books that I've read. Now, that could have been because it was dated and had some elements that were not relevant today. I just feel like I had a hard time picking this book up and reading it, even if I had time to read. I do about 95% of my reading at work, on my lunch breaks, downtime, etc. So there were times where I'd be down, or I'd be on lunch or break, and I would just not pick it up, because it was not as captivating as I would like. That's subjective, and this whole video is subjective, but overall, it was easy to read. I enjoyed it. I don't want to say it was predictable, because that's just not true, but you kind of knew how it was going to end, because there were stakes, but being as I'd kind of read books that take place later, I know that the titular characters, nothing bad happens to them. So if you're going to compare this to the Thrawn trilogy, the Timothy Zahn original Thrawn trilogy, and the Jedi Academy Trilogy, those read like two different books. Timothy Zahn writes a more nuanced story, more captivating story. Those books are older, but they still feel more relevant today. Now, I know everybody worships Timothy Zahn. I think that his first three books were his best. So I'm not here to put this book down or put Kevin J. Anderson down, but I didn't enjoy this book as much as I enjoyed those or other books. But I've also enjoyed this book more than I have other books. You know, it's kind of how it works. You read books, you love these books. I mean, to this day, I have my favorite books, and I don't think anything's going to surpass them. And then you have the books that are like really mid, and you're just like trying to get through it. This wasn't that bad. It was good, but for me personally, it just felt like I was reading a book that was aimed at a younger audience. There wasn't a whole lot of complexity. And maybe that's just me coming off of reading the Ascendancy trilogy, which is very complex and ambitious. So it could all be as to what you read last and where you are in your reading journey. So yeah, we're Luke Skywalker. We're introduced to several other characters that end up being big characters in the expanded universe. There are some things referenced that I didn't understand, but from what I've heard are other elements from other stories. Overall, it was a good book. I enjoyed it, and I'm glad I read it. It just wasn't my favorite book. Now, like I said, that could just be me. Some people hate it, some people love it. As all things should be. Nothing should be perfect and loved by everybody because we're all different. We all have different opinions. Read it or skip it. You should read it. It is a staple point in the EU. We're introduced to characters that we see a lot of later on. And overall, it's a very enjoyable story. Like I said, I wasn't bored with it. I mean, I've read books where I've had to just not touch them again. It wasn't like that. It wasn't bad. It's just, it wasn't as big of a page turner as I expected. So I took a little time reading it. It just wasn't as captivating as I expected it to be or I would have liked. It is roughly 700 or so pages because it's three books all into one. So I spent quite some time on it. I just finished it a couple days ago. So I want to get this video out while it's still fresh in my mind. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, check out more videos. We'll see you in the next one.